to Sichah in Chelef Chof Aleph. It's the third Sichah, page 164. This Sichah is about the shape of the menorah according to the Rambam. The Rebbe first starts off with the mistake that the Olam was making of how the menorah was in the Beis HaMikdash. And then the Rebbe gets into why Chanukah menorah also should be. We're going to see why the Chanukah menorah also should be also not a chatzi eagle, not a semicircle, but more a lachsin, straight line. So if you look on page 172, the Rebbe brings the seer on the Ksaviyat Kedesh of the Rambam, and the Rebbe focuses on two things in the Sichah. Number one, how, like I said, the branches of the menorah are straight, diagonal, and also you're going to see the goblets are upside down. If you look in the Gevim, so the Rambam makes a picture of it, so it's like upside down. There was a question why the Rambam did that. Okay, so Aleph. Wegen der Zier von the Gevim, von the menorah sagen Chazal. So in regards to the design of the goblets on the menorah, so Chazal tell us in Gemara Menachos, Lo mehin daimin, the mahin daimin, kimin kaises Alexandrium. So the Gemara says, what did the Gevim on the menorah, what did they resemble? They resembled like the Alexandrian cups. Is the Rambam mefarish with Pirush HaMishnayos Shalei? So the Rambam explains in his Pirush HaMishnayos, the Rambam wrote a Pirush HaMishnayos in Arabic on all Mishnayos. So in Mishnayos in Menachos, the Rambam explains, as this made Akos was Shulayim Shaloi Tzarim. Their deck is Shmol. So the Rambam explains in his commentary that the goblets, it's a goblet that the base is narrow. Which means if you look at the picture, upside down, the base is narrow. So over here, Marshall, let's say you take this cup. So the base is a little bit smaller than the opening, but it's not narrow because it has to stand. If it would be too narrow, then it would tilt. So that's what the Rambam says, that these Gevim were Shalayim Shaloi Tzarim. Their deck is Shmol. The base was narrow. So not only does Rambam bring this in his Pirush HaMishnayos, but also he brings this in his Rambam Sefer Yad and his Beis HaBchira. What does the Rambam say over there? Hagavim daimim lekaisis Alexandria shirpian rochav v'shalein kotzer. The goblets resembled an Alexandrian cup. They had a wide mouth and narrow basis. So the Rambam says. So the Rebbe says, you find something very astonishing. It says, Fran der Zier von der Menorah was the Rambam hat mit Zeig gewinnt the Guf Ksaviyat Kotre be Pirush HaMishnayos Shalei. You have the illustration of the menorah the Rambam himself drew by his holy hand in Pirush HaMishnayos. Und dort is Messiah the Gevim in a verkehrten Eufen. And over there, when the Rambam explains or depicts the goblets, he depicts it upside down. Dem breiten Chelek HaGevia Pien zum Unten von der menorah und dem schmollen Teil Shulayim Evim. And as we showed in the picture, that the broad end of the goblets, their mouth faced towards the base of the menorah. The narrow part, their bases, faces upwards. Das heißt, Atzir von a Ibrigikehrten Kois Shalachsandria, which means it's an image of an upturned Alexandrian cup. So Rambam says that they were, what were they similar to? They were similar to, the Gemara says, Alexandrian kaisis, Alexandrian goblet, Alexandrian cups. And the Rambam says that, which means that the base was very, very narrow, and that's how the Rambam says in Sefer Yad, that they had wide mouths and narrow bases. So yeah, when the Rambam in his Sefer Yad, when he draws down in the Ksaviyat Kedesh, if you look, the goblets are turned upside down. So why would the Rambam do that? As a Rambam Alein Bavort, that even though the Rambam in his Pirush HaMishnayos, he says, now, if you look in the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, when he draws it, he just says, by the way, a disclaimer that the illustration is only to depict its general design. Ideas mi in Agvim, to know the number of how many goblets, if you count, there's 22 goblets over there, and its placement, but not their exact configuration. So, yes, the Rambam does say that. The Rebbe was as far as a mitzvah the Gevim in a tabnis mishulish. This explains why when he depicts the goblet, is in a triangular shape. It's a triangle shape. That's what tabnis mishulish means. Alpha Pias Kois Alexandrius is nitvia mishulish mamish. Even though when you actually look at an Alexandrian cup, it was not actually being, it's not fully triangular. As understood that the base of a cup never comes to a full point. That's what I was saying before. If you have it too thin or too narrow, it's going to be like it's not going to be sturdy on the table. Or so they're just narrow, especially relative to the breadth of their mouths. So even if you want to say that the Rambam says himself that he's only telling you generally. He's not telling you the actual configurations to the exact, etc. The Rebbe says is das aber nicht kein Tam zum Zar sein verkehrten. Shilayim the Milo and the even the Matam mit Koparop. This doesn't justify depicting them like in an inverted way, with the bases facing upwards and the tips facing downwards, upside down. Where Father's the Rambam is given, the Rambam was particular in everything. Legt sich klar nicht zu sagen, als der Rambam soll mit Zar sein, der Gewinn bei Ifen Hoffach. And by jeder Gewinn 22 Mal. If you look at the Rambam 22 times, if you count the goblets, there's 22 goblets. So what are you going to say? That the Rambam did it 22 times, just not in the diet. Obviously, the Rambam was very particular in when he drew the Gevim being upside down. There's a reason for it. And the question is, why are the Gevim upside down? Now, so the Rebbe says this: L'chein nir lemer, page base. L'chein nir lemer 164. L'chein nir lemer pashas hadavar. Therefore, it's fair to say, as the Rambam mitzayig when the Gevim ba'ifin zeh, the Rambam he depicted the goblets in such a manner, because according to his view, this was actually their correct position of the Menera. His of the Menera, of the Mitzvah Kabbalah, from Melamed to Melamed Midei of the day. Either, how does the Rambam know that? Either from, that the Rambam had this, it was a Meseira. It was a tradition passed on from teacher to teacher. Like the Rebbe says in Hara 11, that nobody questions about the esrig. How do you know the esrig is a citron and not the face an apple? We have a Kabbalah from the day of the day. So the Rambam had a Kabbalah from his Melamed from day of the day that this is how the Menera was. Other Valazeh out there gefunden in a Midachazal Shleigele, or it could have been that it's found as described in a medrash that no longer we don't have it. Therefore, we give him betam bekimmers and Rambam under the shenim yanim was there mucker as a medrash gets was a shleigele, like we find in several instances of the Rambam and other shenim discuss the concept whose source is a medrash, but we don't know about it. On a breitest nit b'sefer yad, he doesn't bring this in a sefer yad. Punkt wie bringt nit. Many times the Rambam doesn't bring, he makes different pictures, and he doesn't in his Mishnayos, and he doesn't bring in a Sefer Yad, the Alpha was b'meilaz an eichen to b'sifrei, kama pratim v'achem mizet and tzir. Even though we don't find that these illustrations are in his Mishnayos, even though there's many details in these illustrations that are not evident in the Sefer Yad. So Rebbe says this, there are a number of reasons for this. Number one, Aleph, Melchatchil is das Tzir nit given in sein Pachnas von Sefer Tachnit, von Sifrei Mishnah Torah. So number one, from the outset, the illustrations were not part of the format of Mishnah Torah. Beis, Api Adua, a Vifel the Rambam is Memayit Betachlis, bringing Besifrei Zachen Bachas, sein nit befurish Bashas Eketim B'zah. As it's known that the Rambam minimizes the extreme, citing anything that's not explicitly stated in the Gemara. And Gimel, Tamim, Protem Elo, Zainul Daite, Nitli, Kuvi, Klau, Tamim. Also, many of these details, in his view, do not inhibit the fulfillment of those mitzvahs at all. And for additional reasons, the topic may be discussed at greater length. And it's not the scope of the work that we're talking about over there. Okay, so the number says it is in Gimel. Hanal Frankfurt is mevar the Rambam. No, so we explained why the Rambam in the Sefer Yad drew it this way and drew it in the Pirush Mishnah this way, and in the Sefer Yad he did not draw it at all. But the Rebbe says, however, the question still is, so even if you want to say that the Rambam, however, he knew that the Gevim, the goblets, were upside down. But the question is, why were the goblets of the Menorah inverted? Why were they upside down? Now, the Rebbe says, in the Krosha Mishkan, you find that the beams of the Mishkan were required to be standing in the manner of the way they grow. In other words, with wood, let's say the Kroshim, so you can, let's say the beams are like this, the way they grow, or you can make the beams like this. However, the Gemara says, and the halacha is that when they actually placed the beams of the Mishkan, it had to be the way that the wood grows, the cedar grows. Atachten the Matavel in the Mile under fun lernen ab as klal as kol hamitzvos kulon ein adam yetza behen eladerf losen. The Gemara says in the Sukkah that a person is not yetza any mitzvahs. So let's say lulav esrog if you do not do the mitzvah the way it's grown. So the question is, for Avaz years old, the Gevim zayin hepech from derech losen. So now the question is, why would the goblets be in inverse in the direction of the growth? The way they go. Esrog the other way, I know, because the truth is we don't really hold it there. The loss of an esrog. All right, so there's a B on that, but but that's the klal. The klal is that every mitzvah has to be derech dilasan. So if the way that the Gevim grew, the way that the Gevim are, is that you have the base, like every base, and the PM is the Mila. So why on the Menorah wouldn't the base be by the base and the opening be by the opening? So the Rebbe says, as das that sein moving like them was me gefind ben again their flawless in Menorah as an Indian is mein bedugmas now. So this will be clarified in light of a similar idea regarding the general concept of the Menorah. The Rebbe says like this: in regards to the light of the Menorah, Chazal tell us, Hashem says, I don't need to have light in the Beis Hamikdash because I need light. Rather, so the light is, Hashem says, it testifies to all the worlds that the divine presence rests amongst the Eden. That's the idea. You have light in the Beis Hamikdash for the Menorah because it's a testimony that the Shekhinah rests by the Eden. The Eid Menorah is not given to beleuchten dem Ort, so the purpose of the Eid Menorah was not to light up the place where the Menorah was, either in the Mishkan or the Father, on the contrary, Dort is Einei Tzar of the Rida. Hashem doesn't need a light, nor is this given on Eidos the Chol Boye Elam. Rather, it's a testimony for all the people in the world, people who come, that it's a testifies to all the world's inhabitants that the divine presence rests amongst the Eden. In our Eifen von Chalenis Tam, in an Eifen, nicht in an Eifen, von Chalenis Tam. So this reason, that's why the windows of the Beis Hamikdash was not in a regular way, nor shkufim atumim. Now the pasuk says that they were open and closed. So the question is, was the windows open or was it closed? So the Gemara says shkufim bachutz, which means that they were open without, and batumim bachutz, and closed with an in, which means breiter and dreisen and schmaller innewenig. They were wider outside, and they were narrower inside. The Mefarshim doesn't mevar. Like the Mefarshim explained. What the Mefarshim saying? A fenster wird gebaut azay. How does a normal window? The design of a window is as the fenster Öffnung is innewenig breiter wie in dreisen. The way a window works is usually it's inside it's wider than the way it is outside. Why today the Likkutei von Dreisen soll sich from spashes an euch die Stadt von dem Cheder. So how do you get light from outside to be mispashet in a room more? So you make the entrance or outside of the window you make it narrower, and inside of the room you make it wider. Why? Because you need the light from outside to bring it in. However, the windows of the Beis Hamikdash was the opposite. Katzen mifnim. Inside it was narrow, and it was wider on the outside. Why? Why? In order that the light should go from the Eichel, it should illuminate the world. Well, the task of what is, because what's the purpose of the Menera is that there should be a testimony for the inhabitants of the world. The Rebbe says in Dalit, you can explain the same thing in regards to goblets. The Rabbeinu Bechaya is Mavar, the Menem is in the Givim for the Menera. The Rabbeinu Bechaya explains the symbolism of the goblets of the Menera. Agivia is a kli sheyesh by base kibble. So a goblet is a vessel that has a receptacle. And he explains, it irrigates and it nourishes. In other words, that's what it has. It has a base kibble. Let's say this is here, and it's able to irrigate and to nourish. When das is adam is if the galgalim shemekabim keichas al yenim umashpim keich alilam beilam hashafel keich boilam hashafel. He explains this alludes to the spheres which receive powers of the lofty realms and confer powers to the lowly worlds. What's that goshen them is? What's the emphasis here? The ashpa me'elyin la'ashafel, mashke umarve. So what's going on over here? You're taking something from lofty to the lowly, and it irrigates and nourishes. The ikar tafku von akais besteht nit in zayin achli kibul. The cup's primary function does not lie in its function as a receptacle. Thus is the tafku von achabis, a barrel. That's what it does. A barrel is a base kibul. In welchem halt mayim. So what's a barrel? A barrel holds water. It holds wine. A case of akli durch welche die mayim von chavis oder mayim geht was kommt on when it's mashkum over the mother mashisin. Now what's a cup? A cup is not only that it should be a base kibul, that it should be it should accept water, but rather you want the cup to actually be mashpia and to give the person water to drink. Now, so comes out as the beer anal from Bechai is masim with the Maimer Razal Hanal that can call us in a Meneda. So now it comes out that the way that the Bechai explains that the Gvia, what was the Gvia? Gvia, the Meneda has a base kibble, but what's a cup that has a base kibble? Not that it should only accept, but it should also be mashpia. This coincides very well with the concept of the Meneda, that the general concept of the Meneda, not only the Gvia, that Leila Eiran Yitzarech Nar Edus to the Chobei Elam. At the Tafka of an Meneda is nit in Anitzarech Kibble. It's not only that Hashem says I need it as a base Kibble Nark. It's about life in the Welt from Machutz. The purpose of the Meneda is to confer to the lowly worlds. Doing it very short. Okay, Al Pizah, you and for us. The Givim b'Meneda is an anefim from Piyam Lamata b'Shlem Maila. Based on this, we can understand why the goblets, we asked before, why were the goblets of the Menera, why were they fashioned in such a way that their rims face downwards and their bases face upwards? When the Givim are in side violin, so they've been kibul b'shas, oimer kiddush alakis, is there matzah pim l'mayla b'shlem l'mata, was damot halten ze oif in zich mashke. when the goblets were used temporarily for the sake of, as they containing such items, or when one has to recite Kiddush over the cup, so their position that the rims are upwards and base is downwards. Why? Because then they can contain liquid. Their matzah there, the hepech from the matzah, b'shul l'mayla, they can't ever them case, the mashke soll sich ausgießen von him. So, since the Manera, as we say, is the idea, is like he says, the Bachai is irrigating and providing. So they're opposite. They're positioned oppositely with their mouths downwards and bases upwards as a cup is turned, as a cup is upturned for the liquid to flow from it. The matzah is there, the effort for the matzah, b'shul l'matzah, in kertibiyah. He says it is. So the same thing, similar in the context in our discussion. Since the light of the menorah needs to illuminate the inhabitants of the world who are from the mikdash, which are spiritually lower than the Beis Hamikdash, or like the Bachaya says, the inhabitants of the world, or spiritually lower than the Beis Hamikdash, or to convert to the lowly worlds. The Riber is matzav agvim shemeneda piyam l'matzav v'shalem l'mayla. That's why they were upside down. Just like the windows were the opposite the way the windows are in a house built. Why? Because again, what's the idea of the Beis Hamikdash? The meneda is not for itself, but it's to shine down into this world. So the gevim, which represent not only a base kibble but also mashko marve. Idea of the meneda is that it should be mashpia also in down into things which are lower than it. Okay.